Good evening, everybody. I'm going to start now. I'm really delighted to see so many people here and people from beyond All Souls community. My name is Emily Kirshland. Welcome to All Souls History Book Talk. I'm a member of the Archives Committee. And my colleagues and I are delighted to be launching our book after several years of work on this project. And we're all very happy to welcome you to this event. In 1970, in anticipation of All Souls' 150th anniversary, Lawrence Staples wrote a book called Washington Unitarianism. It was a history of All Souls Church. Staples, who was retired at the time, had previously served as All Souls executive director for 35 years. Several years ago, as the church's 200th anniversary approached, Reverend Rob Hardy's suggested to the Archives Committee that we bring the Staples book up to date. With lots of stops and starts, we began the project under the leadership of our then committee chair, Molly Freeman. A while after that, Molly retired from the committee and Mara Cherkasky has led our committee ever since. Very ably, I must say. We have left Staples chapters almost completely untouched, but we have added 3 chapters and an index. And I really have to emphasize this. We've been very fortunate that we were able to recruit 3 skilled church members to write the new chapters. These 3 people, Alison Blakely, Carol Falk, and Henry Hubbard, will introduce themselves in a moment, along with the rest of the team. But these authors all have professional backgrounds that make them perfect people to have written these chapters. Also, several of us, primarily Mara Cherkasky, Carol Falk, Julie Hubbard, and I spent hundreds of hours isolated in our homes on Zoom, sharing the screen while making edits and corrections to the manuscript and having lots of disagreements about spacing and periods and different kinds of dashes. All of the team members are here this evening and every member of our team will speak. So we'll start by briefly introducing ourselves. Again, my name is Emily Kirschland. I'm retired, and during most of my career, I worked writing software and doing systems analysis, but I also spent several years working as an editor. I've been a member of All Souls for 20 years, where I've been involved in many areas of the church, and I have worked in the archives for about 10 years. So next, I'm going to introduce Mara Cherkasky.
I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Mara Cherkasky. I'm a historian by training, and I started attending All Souls 10 years ago this month. And at the same time, I started working in the archives.
Okay, and next, Julie Hubbard.
Hello, I'm Julie Hubbard, Julie Pinot Hubbard. I am essentially a lifelong Unitarian. We've been members at All Souls since 2006. I am a lifelong Washingtonian, and I've held various jobs in Washington, the most recent and most lengthy of which was working with special needs children.
Okay, and Alison Blakely.
Good evening, everyone. I'm a retired professor of European and comparative history, and I now enjoy an emeritus status at Boston University, where I taught for 14 years, after earlier spending 30 years on the faculty at Howard University. It was my appointment at Howard that first brought my family to Washington. This also led to our joining All Souls Church. This was just a few years after the beginning of Reverend David Eaton's ministry. During my time at All Souls, I've served one term on the Board of Trustees and on the Beckner Committee. I also sang for 12 years in the All Souls Choir, and I was a founding member of the All Souls Jubilee Singers. I composed the original draft of my essay about David Eaton over 20 years ago. It was for a planned anthology that was canceled at that time for various reasons. It was mainly my background as a historian who has a special interest in Black history, as well as the history of Unitarianism, that led to my being recruited for both projects.
Okay, thanks, Alison. And the next person who will introduce herself is Carol Falk.
Hi, my husband, Alan Johnson, and I have been at All Souls since 1981. And we're now a 3-generation family with our son and family are also members. I'm a retired newspaper reporter, very retired. I retired in 1979 after a 15-year career to stay home with our kids. And I've been active at All Souls in many areas, including serving on the board, a term on the board, and Jubilee Singers, and a lot of other areas.
Okay, and Henry Hubbard will introduce himself.
Yes, I am indeed Henry Hubbard. I am a Unitarian by marriage. Grew up in New York. My lifetime career was in journalism. I worked for Newsweek magazine for 25 years, covered Nixon, covered Nixon's impeachment and other things. And I'm fully retired now. We joined All Souls in, as Julie said, in 2016. No, 2006, when we left Cedar Lane because of the reputation that we had heard of from Rob, and been there ever since.
Great. So next, we will, Mara, next slide. The table of contents. Yeah. First person who'll do a presentation is Mara Cherkasky. She will speak about All Souls civil rights work under Reverend A. Powell Davies.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming. All Souls social justice work pretty much started with A. Powell Davies, who served as minister from 1944 to 1957. I'm going to focus on civil rights and show a few items from the archives. For most of Davies' tenure, almost everything in Washington was racially segregated and legally so. In the 1940s, All Souls was one of the few places in the city where interracial groups could meet. The church also housed an interracial community vacation school and an interracial nursery school. Lawrence Staples wrote in chapter 10 of the book, Dr. Davies' sermon of January 13th, 1946 on religion, common sense, and the race question really brought the issue of race into the open, end quote. President Truman had appointed a committee on civil rights, which issued a report listing dozens of measures needed for the country to move away from racial discrimination. In late 1947, All Souls held a special meeting on whether to adopt a resolution supporting the report, which was called To Secure These Rights. This November 24th, 1947 Washington Post article says, and I'm paraphrasing, by an overwhelming vote, 174 to 18, the congregation called upon the President and Congress to pass as rapidly as possible appropriate measures to implement the recommendations of the report. One of the members who spoke out in favor of the resolution was former Assistant Attorney General Wendell Burge. He called the report a mighty contribution, a great state document.
Mara, I'm sorry, you may have to move your microphone down a little.
An intelligent, is that better? Discussion of dangers that threaten freedom in America, end quote. By the way, when Burge died in 1955, he was chairing the All Souls Board of Trustees. Anyway, from the article, another member who spoke up at the meeting was Colonel Archibald King, and he said he was in sympathy with the broad purposes of the report, but desegregating DC schools would, quote, wreck the school system and cause hundreds of parents to move to Maryland and Virginia, end quote. Staples wrote, it was a tribute to Dr. Davies' persuasive powers, the rightness and righteousness of his cause, that this action brought almost no resignations or separations from church membership. A couple of days after the vote, Mary McLeod Bethune, the renowned educator, founding director of the National Council of Negro Women, and former member of FDR's so-called Black Cabinet, wrote Reverend Davies this letter. She said, those of us who appreciate and commend the report of the President's Committee on Civil Rights are fully aware of the courageous stand which you and your congregation have taken in wholehearted support of this new Charter of American Freedom. President Truman has taken a great step forward in the effort to make America a working democracy, and all of us who believe he is right must stand up and be counted, end quote. This is just one of the laudatory letters Davies received from African-American leaders. The NAACP would recognize him with its annual award in 1949. In November 1948, Reverend Davies wrote to President Truman, this is a carbon copy. It was just a few months after Truman ended segregation in the US military. May I make a suggestion, sir? It is perhaps one that you are already considering, namely the appointment of an American Negro to your new cabinet. Not only here in the United States, but throughout the world, such an appointment would be dramatic evidence of the sincerity of our democratic faith, end quote. While the letter did not result in a Black cabinet secretary, it did make the news. The Evening Star newspaper wrote about it, and by way of context, also mentioned that All Souls was one of the first congregations in the country to endorse the 1947 report. Anyway, the publicity about the cabinet appointment suggestion brought some hate mail, such as this postcard, which says, to anyone with even a little newspaper experience, it is apparent that you are trying to get appointed to something, or that you crave publicity. If you are so enamored of the colored people, why not publicly invite them into your church, as well as into the president's cabinet? And I am sure you could find a house in a nice high-class colored district that would be much more convenient than your present residence. Yours truly, A.B. XGI. And he mailed the postcard to Reverend Davies' home on Jennifer Street, Northwest. In early 1953, Reverend Davies invited members of the congregation to join him in refusing to patronize restaurants and entertainment venues that did not serve African Americans. A coalition of organizations put together a list of non-segregated eateries and distributed more than 40,000 copies. This is copy, or part of it. At the top is a statement from Reverend Davies. Basically, we have talked long enough. It is time for action. And it is time for me to pass on the mic.
Well, thanks, Mara. Next, we will hear from Julie Hubbard. Julie will talk about the suburban churches that grew out of All Souls. Her topic is, name of her presentation is Unitarian Extension.
So as you saw there in the table of contents, the original publication of Washington Unitarianism, the book, included a chapter with the not terribly catchy title, Unitarian Extension, about efforts that waxed and waned over more than 75 years to expand the reach of Unitarianism in and around Washington. That chapter, as is true of all of the original chapters, is still in the book. And it tells the story of Unitarianism's flourishing in the Washington metropolitan area. This family tree up on the screen now is a picture of the basic information in the book and makes clear the central role of All Souls Church in the spread of our religion. After 125 years of a single central voice in the heart of the city of Washington, Unitarianism blossomed into the suburbs. In just 6 years, from 1948 to 1954, 5 new Unitarian congregations were started, 2 in Virginia, Arlington and Alexandria, and 3 in Maryland, in Bethesda, Adelphi, and Camp Springs. Further, the Unitarian Church of Arlington gave rise to the Unitarian Congregation of Fairfax in 1955, and Cedar Lane Unitarian Church spawned the Unitarian Church of Rockville and River Road Unitarian Church in 1959. These congregations all began, by the way, as simply Unitarian, because the merger with Universalism didn't occur until 1961. I think it's safe to say that it was the ministry of A. Powell Davies that spurred Unitarian expansion in the Washington area. His wonderfully resonant voice and the intensity of his passion for Unitarian spirituality, combined with an important social conscience, drew folks to the faith in remarkable numbers. That is certainly the story of my family. Even though my sister and I were quite small in 1952 when we started coming to All Souls, we both have vivid memories of sitting with our mother. Our father was sympathetic, but not a joiner. In the south balcony, 3rd section back from the pulpit, front row, hearing the voice of Reverend Davies. I should add, I suppose, that Sunday school didn't work for Suzanne and me. The halls and rooms in All Souls at the time were dark and scary, and we thought that the canned pineapple juice tasted just awful. But our mother left her childhood Methodism for the preaching she heard at All Souls and wanted us to know that we were Unitarians. So we piled into our family car on Sundays and went downtown with her to church. About the same time that Reverend Davies lured us into Unitarianism, All Souls Board of Trustees recognized the overcrowding in both the sanctuary on Sunday mornings and the Sunday school, and voted to support the formation of the Montgomery County Unitarian Center. The center's organizing committee secured a meeting place in which participants would gather on Sunday mornings, the Women's Club of Chevy Chase. In the club's large meeting hall, congregants sat in rows of folding chairs, listening to the Sunday morning service coming through a telephone line into a speaker. The speaker was set up on the stage at the front of the meeting room and was adorned with flowers. And from the speaker came the voice of A. Powell Davies. On the first Sunday of worship there in September of 1951, Reverend Davies greeted his satellite Chevy Chase congregation. And I should say here, the second of its kind, the first having been the Unitarians in Arlington, who had begun to organize 5 years earlier. Reverend Davies said, "What you are beginning today is immense in promise and wide in possibility. We look forward to the time when you have built a sister church, another citadel of free religion in the Washington community." More than 100 adults were present at the Women's Club that first Sunday, and so many children had been enrolled that it took 2 more weeks to enlist enough teachers and acquire enough supplies for the Sunday school to begin. My mother, eventually weary of the drive into town, followed like-minded Unitarians to the Women's Club in 1955 and joined a large and growing group of suburban Unitarians. 18 months later, ground was broken on 6 lovely wooded acres on Cedar Lane in Bethesda. And in the spring of 1958, The sister church, of which Powell Davies had spoken 7 years earlier, was dedicated, with the number of adult members having grown sevenfold. That's 700 since the Montgomery County group first assembled. There were 2 Sunday morning services for the 700 adults at Cedar Lane from the very beginning. And my sisters and brother and I attended Sunday school in one of the 3 sessions created to accommodate these 600 plus children enrolled in the religious education program. The Unitarian Extension chapter in our book begins with this quotation from A. Paul Davies. We could be forerunners of a church which includes the whole human community, which does not demand conversions from the restrictions of one tradition to those of another, which federates and mingles in its onward marching purpose the living values of all traditions on the basis of universal fellowship and universal freedom, end quote. The Unitarians of All Souls, in combination with members of the Universalist Church of America, have fostered and or witnessed the creation of 22 liberal religious congregations in this area. The 5 I've already mentioned, plus Unitarian churches, fellowships, congregations. Different groups chose different names because we are Unitarians and pretty independent after all. They included Fairfax, Reston, Accotink, Sterling, Manassas, and Leesburg in Virginia, and Frederick, Sugarloaf, Bowie, Leonardtown, Germantown, Annapolis, Hagerstown, and Columbia in Maryland. It is, I think, a pretty wonderful family tree. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. That was great. Next, I've got to say, I haven't heard these presentations before, and I'm really impressed. Our next speaker is Alison Blakely. Alison wrote the chapter on Reverend David Eaton, and he will speak about David Eaton's concept of ministry at All Souls.
Reverend David Eaton served All Souls from 1969 to 1992, and was at first best known for becoming the first Black minister of All Souls and the first Black senior minister in the entire Unitarian Universalist Association that had just been founded 8 years earlier. But his most striking and lasting contribution was his personal engagement in social justice activism in the Washington community. I discussed that in considerable detail in my chapter on David, so I prefer to use my brief remarks here to share a few observations on what I think was David's concept of his ministry. In considering his place in the history of Unitarianism, I'm especially impressed by his awareness of the historical context of his ministry at All Souls. And I think that reflected his having been a philosophy major at Howard University as an undergrad, with a special interest in African-American history. I have reached this conclusion based not only on sermons of David I read during my research, but also on the most memorable of those that I witnessed in Sunday services. In those, he often quoted Howard Thurman, a very influential Black theologian, philosopher, civil rights leader, and educator. Thurman was part of the generation ahead of David and me, and he served as the first dean of Rankin Chapel at Howard from 1932 to 1944, and later as dean of Boston University's Marsh Chapel from 1953 to 1965. In 1944, he'd left his tenured position at Howard to help establish a church he named the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples in San Francisco. In other words, an earlier All Souls Church. It was the first sizable, racially integrated, intercultural church in the United States. Thurman served for a time as co-pastor alongside a white minister. I've not found evidence of David interacting with Howard Thurman personally during David's divinity studies at Boston University while Thurman was there, but he clearly considered Thurman a role model. Thurman had been a classmate of Martin Luther King Jr.'s father at Morehouse and was later regarded as a mentor by Martin Jr., who was also a Morehouse grad. And Thurman inspired many other civil rights leaders through his writings, including David. I think taking Thurman's influence into account helps explain David's determination to be an activist minister, as well as his ability to be the spiritual advisor to Washington's Mayor Marion Barry, whose own prominence in the civil rights movement first began when he became the first national chairman of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, in 1960. I think the essence of the part of Thurman's message that helped shape David's All Soul ministry is captured in the following two short quotes from Thurman's writings. The movement of the Spirit of God in the hearts of men and women often calls them to act against the spirit of their times, or causes them to anticipate a spirit which is yet in the making. In a moment of dedication, they're given wisdom and courage to dare a deed that challenges and to kindle a hope that inspires. The second quote, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. What the world needs is more people who have come alive.
Thank you, Alison. And our next speaker will be Carol Falk. Carol wrote the chapter in part 2 of the book called Turbulence and Transition. And Carol will talk about facing issues of racism within our walls during the 1990s.
Thanks, Emily. First, I'd like to share a little credit. 3 of us on this panel have our names on chapters, so you know what we did. But the other 3 also did an enormous amount of work behind the scenes. I mean, Mara, you know, she's our archives team leader, and a historian, but she also knew more about publishing than any of the rest of us. So she did almost all the formatting and did most of the communicating with the publishers at Politics and Prose. She also keeps track of the photos in our archives. So she selected and suggested the placement of all the photos in this edition. Julie did a great deal of editing and rewriting. She's got an ear for language and a good eye for organization. And Emily, if you appreciate having an index in this book, the original edition didn't have one. You can thank Emily. She volunteered to do this enormous, eye-straining, brain-numbing job. She read and took notes on the book so many times, she practically had it memorized. So my chapter covers the years between the death of David Eaton in 1992 and the arrival of Rob Hardy's in 2001. Like today, this was an interim period. Actually, it was 2 interim periods, separated by the ministry of Daniel Webster Aldridge, whose contract we terminated after just 4 years. Those who were here at that time will never forget it. Newer folks may have heard references to it and wondered just what happened. It's not that we're keeping it a secret. It was just so painful to remember. This period in the 1990s, in many ways, was the first time we'd had to face charges of racism within the church itself. Until then, we'd never really talked about how race affected us as a congregation, probably feeling that having had a Black senior minister for 23 years and a history of civil rights activism made us exempt from accusations of racism. We had selected Dan Aldridge in large part because we badly wanted another African-American minister. We feared that without that powerful symbol of welcome that David Eaton had represented in the pulpit, we would become a typical, mostly white UU church. Now, choosing someone because of his race may not be racist the way excluding someone due to race is, but it left us with a relatively small pool of candidates and may have blinded us to other factors. Plus, there were cultural differences that we hadn't recognized. Most members who lived through that time agree that racism was not the principal cause of the downfall of the Aldridge ministry, although it certainly complicated it. There were personality differences unrelated to race. Despite a background working in local government in Detroit, he had neither a politician's people skills nor the charm of a David Eaton. He tended to confront rather than co-opt the established lay leadership. There were clashes over his role. We had said we wanted a strong leader, but a CEO. But his method of leading came across to many people as autocratic. He was a great idea man, but he lacked follow-through. By 3 years into his tenure, he had alienated the leaders of 6 key committees, and we weren't growing. However, to quote Paula Cole-Jones, who led our reconciliation work after the Aldridge ministry, in a multiracial community, you don't get to separate race out because you don't know how it impacts. The cultural differences showed up in ways large and small. One big mistake he made was to complain about his salary from the pulpit, even though when he came, he had volunteered to take a lower salary than advertised after he saw the sad state of our finances. Most congregants were embarrassed at this public airing of his grievance, but sponsors of a fundraising crab fest then proposed to donate the entire proceeds to boost the minister's salary, despite the fact that people who had already purchased tickets expected the proceeds to go to the still-strapped general operating fund. Since many of those working on the fundraiser were Black, this fanned some racial tensions over whether the Black senior minister was being cared for appropriately. The Queen of Boston, who later led multicultural efforts for the UUA, explains that Black churches tend to be more gracious to clergy. For instance, whereas a minister in a Black church is made to feel valued through such simple gestures of respect as being urged to sit down and be served during coffee hour, UUs are likely to expect their ministers to get his own coffee. Aldridge also got in some trouble for remarks that All Souls members heard him make at a conference of the National Multicultural Institute. They heard him say that persons of European ancestry just wanted to meet in church basements on folding chairs, use lots of newsprint, and pass resolutions. What they do not want to do, he said, is initiate fundamental structural change. He was also quoted as saying that white people have a fear of Black male leadership, adding, the problem is that we do not want this Negro running things. Racism also took the form of whites being afraid to criticize Aldridge for fear of being labeled racist. So Blacks ended up having to lead the opposition to the minister. As a result, they were labeled Uncle Toms and race traitors. By early 1998, the congregation was divided into two camps, both led by African Americans. Angry words and intemperate accusations were coming from both sides. On June 14th, 1998, the congregation voted 146 to 102 to terminate his contract. 50 or 60 families left the church. Reconciliation efforts led by Paula Cole Jones became a dialogue on race and ethnicity, or ADOR, which continues to this day. Jubilee anti-racism training followed. Eventually, many of those who left came back. But we had learned that we cannot ignore racial issues within the church.
Thank you, Carol. And our last speaker will be Henry Hubbard. Henry is the author of the chapter about the ministry of Reverend Rob Hardy's, and the topic of his presentation is Church Growth under Rob Hardy's.
Thanks to all. Thanks, Emily, my favorite indexer. Rob and I, well, did we mention, yes, that we got together first with Rob when we moved from Cedar Lane to All Souls in 2006, and never regretted it. When I was chosen or drafted or volunteered, I don't exactly remember which, to do the job of writing Rob's church biography, we had many meetings on the major themes that we decided had affected Rob's time. You know, it is interesting that Rob resigned just about the time that we started on this project. So, as I said to him, it's nice I can write about the beginning, and I can also write about the write-up. We decided to take on the major themes of his 19 years. We talked about the badly needed renovation of the church, the scary dungeons that Julie mentioned, the many aspects of social justice that needed to be pursued, the HIWA project. If younger members of the congregation don't know what the HIWA project is, it's worth reading about and talking about with people like Judith Bauer. Marriage equality, which I think was one of Rob's great triumphs. Hurricane Katrina, and then more general, we took on national politics, we took on war and peace, we took on voting rights, and some of the other myriad challenges that face a minister. But the first and overarching challenge was, as he put it to me, this is a quote, to heal the church, to rebuild the bonds of care and community and love. Consequences of the turmoil that Carol explained to you. Attendance in September of 2001, when Rob arrived, along with 9/11, was only 110 people. 180 people. The church that we were sitting in, that had started up all those churches that Julie mentioned, was now begging for money from its children. It was so broke. So Rob's way of putting it was to say that his first task was to, quote unquote, rebuild the church. He said to me last year that a large part of the plan was to make church attendance on Sunday morning worth attending. He in part wanted to take advantage, or decided he should take advantage of the great increase in attendance caused by 9/11. which gave him an opportunity to build. The way he phrased it, he said in a phrase that was a little bit circular, a little bit roundabout. He said, quote, "No one would ever come to the church if Sunday morning wasn't worth coming to." So we spent a lot of effort and intentionality creating a dynamic spirit of love and energy on Sunday morning, and one that reflected the diversity of the city. Diversity being a major theme of Rob throughout his years. Populating the church had many aspects, but building up the Sunday crowd meant making a huge priority for Rob out of something that was not immediately apparent: music. As you all know, Rob was a music lover, but he was not big on using old hymns and canonical music written by dead white Trinitarians. With some help from John Strang, who was the athletic director, the music director, and a wonderful organist. He started work on building a very, very strong ability, or I guess, what would you call it, a front to develop a really strong music operation. Rob developed a game plan that brought a different kind of music front and center, which also reflected the diversity of the congregation. The strategy was actually written about in a book, who happens to be with you today, co-authored by a husband-wife ministerial team at West Shore Unitarian Universalist Church in Rocky River, Ohio, which I believe is near Cleveland. Those two were Wayne Arneson and our very own Reverend Kathleen Rowlands. They first visited All Souls and published their book, Worship That Works, in 2005, and made many trips back, including the most recent one, except for the job that she's doing now, in 2017, when they updated the book. In Hardy's team's approach, the authors wrote, this is Kathleen and her husband, quote, "The first visual and auditory impressions of a service are vital." That is the key sentence of this whole presentation. You needed a strong beginning. You needed strong initial visual and auditory impressions to get the service's attention. No boring homilies or hymns. Instead of the standard hymnal sung from the choir loft, the Hardy's team wanted to start off in a way that was fresh, new, and different. The choir used a stable of just a dozen or so processionals that were different and easy to learn, and for sure, not anything we had sung from the hymn book. We all know them. Yonder Come Day, Hush, Someone's Calling My Name, When I Went Down to the River to Pray. Hardy's described the process to the visiting ministers this way. By memorizing the music, the congregation owns the processional. The opening parts of the service lead up to this early climactic moment that signals the congregation's entry into holy time. They have heard the bells calling them to church. They have ignited the symbol of the faith community, and they have brought the cares of their lives to mind and laid them on the altar. What Rob said is very similar to what you'll find from Kathleen in her book. The congregation usually, as the procession proceeded, the congregation stood and sang along, usually with an a cappella choir, sometimes to the sound of African drums to further reflect our diversity. By the time the processional was over, we all knew where we were and why. Hardy's added very early in his reign, the Spirit of Life as a weekly event sung in Spanish and England, which became such a beloved staple that Rob once confessed to me that it often scored higher than his sermons on questionnaires filled out by his congregants. The talent behind him continued to grow, the musical talent, that is. The choir, always good, became downright excellent. The Jubilee singers grew stronger under Leonard Stark. Strang went on to a PhD with a specialty in pediatric neuropsychology, but still plays for us occasionally. Replacing John Strang was the one and the only Jen Heyman, who was just an outstanding chorus director. Add in Rochelle Rice and the soloists, Gordon Kent and the musicians, the choirs, for a truly spectacular music program. Propelled by 9/11, All Souls grew rapidly, as I mentioned before, as did many other churches. As time passed, however, I have read that church attendance nationally slid back to normal levels. Not so for All Souls. Attendance on the Sunday after 9/11 grew to 385 from the previous average of 180, but it stayed up. At its peak, total membership climbed to 1,400 people. I personally think that much of it was because of Rob Hardy's leadership. He's a gifted preacher, and his congregation grew larger and younger. The talent behind him grew and grew, with Rob occasionally exceeding his music budget, but no one seemed to complain. In 2017, and I hope I got this right, Kathleen, that when Kathleen and her husband revisited All Souls, they updated their book and added 6 appendices. All Souls was given top billing. If I got that wrong, she'll let you know. Thank you.
Thanks, Henry. So now we have some time for questions. If anybody wants to ask a question or make a comment, you can do it in the chat, or if you know how to electronically raise your hand, do so. Or if you don't, sit here and go like this and we'll see you. So does anybody have anything they want to say or ask?
Names.
It's Meredith. And I wanted to just give a few. First of all, you were wonderful. I can't wait to get the book and see what you did. And Carol had to get me to sign the paper that it was okay for what I said. It took me forever to do it, and I apologize for that. But I've been a member since 1970. And so I've lived through all of this that you've been talking about. One thing that I don't know if you know, A. Powell Davies, he died young. His wife lived more than 50 years after he died. I think she died at 103. And she told me sometime in the last time that the only time that they were afraid from people at night, trying to get into their house or give them problems or something like that, was when he made sermons about people of color. And, she told me that, and that's interesting, that because he was a leader in a lot of different ways, but that one he really took on. And then I just wanted to say, it's so good you all are here. I don't know if you saw me on it, but I was smiling and smiling. So thank you. That's all I want to say right now. But I'd love to get the book and we can talk more about the experience.
Thanks, Meredith. I saw, Lucy Summers. You're muted, Lucy.
Sorry. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to get the book too. We've been working on something, the Silver Souls, with the with David Eaton, but I want to say something in defense of Dan Aldridge. I was born and raised a Unitarian in Connecticut. When I came to DC, I started coming to All Souls at an invitation of another member who's moved to Texas right now to join the Jubilee Singers. So I've been in the church since the late 70s. I think I joined in order to vote for the music budget for the Jubilee Singers, to be included. I really feel that two ways about Dan. I don't think he was treated very well. He brought a lot of Black people, like David. He brought a lot of Black people and people of color to the church. We had jazz vespers, we had book signings, we had all kinds of things. So it wasn't all negative. And I remember the vote that we had in June, and a lot of us left and tried to start another church. I went to a lot of different churches. Eventually, I did come back to All Souls in about maybe about 2 or 3 years later. But I don't think he was given the same support that other ministers had had. And even David, before he died, he was sick, and there was a lot of criticism there. And I got to know his wife very well before she moved to Ohio, and she's dead now. But, he endured a lot of criticism too. So what I want to say is that I love Rob. I think he was a great minister. I hope our next minister is somebody that can relate to all the generations and the races. But I do feel, and like I said, I was raised in a Unitarian church. And when I came to All Souls, it was like a big shock to see so many Black people and so many different people doing things in a Unitarian church. So that's what I'm going to say. I know it's a lot of work to do anything in print, to get anything, but I do think that if you ask some other people about Dan and this whole period, that 10 years or so, a little less than 10 years, I guess, was very, very difficult for the church. We had a couple of interim ministers, and people were coming and going and things like that. And a lot of people's feelings were hurt. But what I'm saying is, I think eventually it turned out, Rob grew the church so much, and I think that's a good thing. But I do know that different people feel differently, especially how Black people have been treated by the church. So I'm going to say, I hope that's not too negative, but I'm going to say good night, and I hope we all can do better. Thank you.
Luch, I don't disagree with you. I had limited time. Dan certainly had good points, and I think, a lot of people would say we handled it very bad, the whole situation very badly. So I'm glad you spoke up.
Well, I'm glad you did what you did. Thank
So we have a few more minutes for questions. I don't mean to cut anybody short, but Courtney Dunn and Moses Rojas had their hands up.
Hi, I just wanted to say that was a nice presentation. Thanks for that. My question surrounds, I guess in February 13th of this year, an album called Jazz Samba will be having its 60th anniversary. And according to my research, it was recorded at Pierce Hall at All Souls Unitarian in 1962, February 13th. And I was wondering if the archivist knew under what circumstances it was recorded at All Souls, and whether other albums had been. Incidentally, it's an album that made it to top 1,000 albums you should listen to before you die, according to Rolling Stone. It's great. It's a great album. And I was wondering just how it actually got recorded there and whether others had been.
Yeah, it's Charlie Bird and Stan Getz.
Charlie
right?
Bird and
Very
Stan
famous
Getz. Yeah, that's
album.
right.
So, over.
Thanks.
Well, I remember looking that up and I can't remember offhand now, but I can, if you're wondering, I will look it up again and I'll let you know. And I'll write down your name because sometimes I tell people I'll look stuff up and I look it up, but I can't remember who to get back to. So I will do that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much.
Thanks for that.
Sorry, I've got too many windows open here. Next question. So if you could put your hands down, Moses, put your hand down. Mary Ann Anderson.
Hello, thank you. Thank you all for these presentations. They've been outstanding and I can't wait to buy the book. I have my quick question is, when I joined All Souls in, I think 2007, I was given a little book by A. Powell Davies from the A. Powell Davies Committee. And I'm just wondering, I love that book. I have read so many of those sermons and so many of the prayers in that little book. I don't remember the name of it. It's upstairs, of the heart, something of the heart. And I'm just wondering if that still happens with new members or if there's any occasion when that book is still given out. Does anyone know? Oh,
It didn't happen when we joined in 2006.
Seven.
Yeah. And I was never given that book either, and I joined in 2003. I am aware that Davies wrote that book, but that doesn't answer your question.
I think it's out of print.
it may be out of print. I just wondered because it was a really special gift. It was really a gift of the heart, and I really very much appreciated that. So I wondered if that's still happening. Yeah, thank you.
Stephen Stichter, our very capable man who's been assisting us tonight, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just very briefly, thanks on behalf of the 200th anniversary for this kickoff event, and what a great way to recognize the 200th by starting with our history, and congratulations on getting the book out. I got I picked up mine from Mara recently, and I appreciate it already. When we are just going, there have been a lot of stories in the newspaper in the last couple of days about the Knickerbocker Theater and the cave-in of the roof of the Knickerbocker Theater and the almost 100 people who died. And it wasn't really covered in that post coverage in the last couple of weeks, but at the time, All Souls was between buildings, and the next morning, had it happened the next morning, it would have crashed in on All Souls church service, which was happening at the Knickerbocker at the same time. And Emily, thanks for the index, because I was able to quickly find the reference in here and confirm that that story that I had heard. So
our hero.
So thank you all for all of this work, and I just a shout out for please watch for 200th related events that are coming up over the next 6 months.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Judy Fisher.
Hello, everyone. I have, I'm unmuted. Okay, I have 2 points to make. The first is about the music at All Souls. Lloyd McNeil, who is a local artist and musician, recorded at All Souls. In fact, I think I have the, the album someplace. And also the first Erie Carey, which was a Cuban band that came to the United States. They made their first appearance in the United States playing jazz at All Souls. And that was probably like 78, maybe a little bit earlier. Anyway, so there was a lot of music at All Souls, a lot of jazz, and actually Dan Aldridge brought most of it. I want to piggyback on something that that Luce said about Dan. I was on the board at that time, and you know there was a lot of stuff going on, but I do know that there were certain board members and certain members of the congregation that actively worked to undermine his ministry. I mean, actively worked to undermine it. And that's all I have to say about it.
Mhm.
Thank you, Judy. Reverend Kathleen Rollins.
Oh, thanks. I just first of all have to give y'all a big shout out and say how grateful I was to be welcomed into the early reading of these chapters and all of the work that went into it. So big kudos and shout out. I guess mine's just more of a comment than a question. I think what I've been looking at as I've read the Staples book and then the new chapters is, you know, each one of these eras, there is a legacy that's been left. And I was sort of looking at what both ministries and laity, what were some of the legacies in each of these eras and epochs in All Souls history. And I think that you all have identified that really beautifully and powerfully. And I also so appreciate the candor in which you have dealt with the hard things that have happened at All Souls, and not shied away from that, but written about it, you know, with as much clarity and honesty as you can. And so I'm really just grateful. And I think, you know, I got to tell you, I've said this before, I expected to find All Souls a lot more damaged as a congregation because of some of these hard things. But I'm not experiencing that. There's so much health and healing and love as well. And I think that's part of the legacy. That's a huge part of the legacy of All Souls that will just hold you in wonderful stead for your next chapter. And Henry, you got it right. I did. There is a complete appendix with All Souls. All Souls was one of the places we visited, of course, and had wonderful conversations with Rob and John Strang. This was pre-Jen Heyman, and really, really, I'm just so grateful to be a part of the worship life now at All Souls. And so thank you all. What a labor of love.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Mara has her hand raised. She'd like
Yes,
to say something.
I just wanted to push people to buy the book directly from us because it'll be cheaper and you'll get it right away. Well, as soon as you pick it up. Or if you're in our neighborhoods, I for one will deliver. I'll walk it over. That'll give me an excuse to get on and take a walk. I live in Petworth, and I'll deliver in Columbia Heights, Petworth. I don't know.
Friendship Heights, Chevy Chase. I'll deliver too.
And so if you order it from Politics and Prose, they're not really stocking it. They sold out. So apparently everyone who's ordering it is told that they have, you know, it's on order, it's on back order, and it'll take 2 weeks. So if you're getting it from Politics and Prose, you're going to pay sales tax. And then if you're getting it sent, then it's an $8 shipping fee. So from us, it's only $20 and it's immediate. And plus we need to sell them and we make more money. Where the church makes, we bought 200 copies and we make $7.50 per copy, you know, when we sell them directly, and we only make something like $4, you know, when Politics and Prose sells them. So, and we want the boxes out of our front halls too. We'll have them at the church when we start meeting in person. In a few weeks.
Yeah, and just a couple of Molly Freeman and her grandson posted a question in the chat. We're wondering if we could hear a bit more about what led to the sale of the parking lot during Minister Eaton's tenure. Molly remembers a prominent church member's tire being stolen. And Jeff Sherwood posted an answer. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if any of us does.
Well, this is Molly Freeman's grandson.
Hi,
My
grandson.
grandma and I have been
Hi, Molly.
reading aloud. Gama, you want to say hi to everyone?
Hello.
We've been reading aloud from the first chapter on Minister Eaton's time in the church. And we have been having an absolute blast. So we wanted everyone to know that it's wonderfully written and extremely interesting. Probably 10 years ago, I helped my grandma go through a specific section of archives on the Eaton ministry. And so I was very curious to learn, and you can sort of ask her about details in between and she'll fill them right in. And one of the ones that I thought was particularly interesting, as I said, it seemed sort of unlikely that someone would, a congregation would be willing to sell a parking lot when a lot of people were driving in. And she said that a prominent elderly member of All Souls, as she and my late granddad remembered, had been, what was it? It was his
tire was stolen.
His tire was stolen, and that was perhaps a catalyzing event, some congregants at the time thought, for why people were ready to get rid of the parking lot. So we were just kind of wondering if anyone knows about this. We don't need to hear now, but we were digging into the details and really just enjoying the work, the account of racism in and out of the church during that era, during the following era, and as I think some people read today, in the way that people have come together and can come together, in the future as needed. So just wanted to say thank you for the amazing work, and that we're really enjoying it. And if you know about that one incident, we were quite interested. I also now live 3 blocks from the church, so I'm going to be walking around as I read to enjoy some of the different moments in history. Thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah, hi, Molly. We're all glad to see you.
How are you?
And grandson, I know Molly has a lot of grandsons. What is your name?
I'm Saul.
Saul, okay. Saul Levin, right?
Correct.
I got that. So do we have any more questions? Any more raised hands? There's one raised hand I see here. Who is it?
Allison.
Lori Lester.
I just wanted you to pay attention to Molly's question. That's all. Saul, it's wonderful to see you.
Nice to see you too.
I remember you from Hands on Science.
Oh, that
nice
was
to
okay.
see you again.
Allison, are you raising your hand?
Yes, I'm trying. I just wanted to briefly remark that I wouldn't have written that chapter if Molly Freeman hadn't made me.
Allison.
That sounds like Molly. That sounds like Molly.
What a terrible thing to say. I never made you do anything.
I can vouch for something, Molly. Yes. I can vouch for things that she encourages people to do. Yeah.
Yeah, Molly is was a lot of the energy behind this revised book came from Molly Freeman. And when you get the book, you open it, you'll see that it's dedicated to Molly and her beloved late husband, Bob. So, yeah. And also Louise Green posted in the chat, in case y'all didn't see it, that the Bob Freeman used to give out those A. Powell Davies books that Marianne asked about. Okay. Sorry, we've come to the end of our time. One thing we want to do is make sure and encourage everybody to buy the book. Do we have that slide, Mara? come up with a slide that gives you information on how to purchase the book. Stephen, who's one of the leads on the bicentennial, did you have any announcements to make? Any further announcements?
No, I just wanted to bring the greetings from the 200th committee and watch the bulletin for upcoming events.
Great, okay. All right, yeah, a lot of you have already bought the books. And as Mara said, you'll get it much more quickly if you order it through the church than if you order it from Politics and Prose, plus it will cost you a little bit less. So I think that brings this presentation to an end. I'm pleased that so many people attended. Any of the other participants have any parting words or?
Thank you all for coming. It was fun.
Yes, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Emily, for
We're so
being our-
relieved to have gotten this book into print.
Yes.
It frees up like so much of our lives now.
Right. And thank you, Mara, for shepherding us through this. It was huge.
You're recovering
I
nicely.
won't say any time, but I'm glad to have completed the project.
And thank you, Emily, for your moderation as well. Really wonderful.
Thank you,
Everybody.
All right, take care.
Okay, thanks to everybody for attending.
Thank you.
And see you in church. Or